So, without more ado, I'll hand you over to the capable hands of Brenda.
Thank you very much. Now, this is an unusual thing this evening because the intent is to produce three sort of 15-minute videos which can be put on the web to describe these different things. And so the format is completely different. It's for the general public, it's for MPs, anybody that wants an update. And so it's done in as populist a mode as possible, but with lots of illustrations. So I'm going to do something terrible, and I'm going to read most of it to keep the pace up to match the scope of what we're talking about. And so, ladies and gentlemen, thank you. This is the first time for me to talk here about the weak, weather-dependent systems of renewable energy, but it is part of our energy mix. The prospect of a huge wind farm in Bournemouth Bay is too much to ignore. We must all face up to the implacable forces of bumbledom. Is global warming happening? The Arctic ice has melted by something like 30% lower than it was 25 years ago. These are NASA pictures. You can ask why it is that small things can have a large effect. Well, I have here a 10 milligram pill of blood pressure medicine. Now, 10 milligrams in a 70 kilogram person is 1 part in 7 million. And you think that can't possibly do anything at all. But of course, 10 milligrams of the molecules of the drug work out to 100 million molecules. So inside the body, those are well able to go round and do their job. In the same way, carbon dioxide in the atmosphere should be around 300 parts per million to keep life on the planet in balance. It adjusts the heat content of the air and the oceans to support life. Burning coal and gas has raised this to 400 parts per million in the last 2 centuries, no reduction in sight. We will in fact burn them all within 2 centuries at the present rate of exploitation. Global warming is our fault. Can renewables stop it? You'll find a lot of detail here on our Twitter site about Navitus. Imported wind, solar and hydropower are all driven by sunshine, but they are erratic and only produce about 2 watts per square metre. Windmills have been around for centuries and have been redesigned with modern technologies. They produce about 25-30% of their full capacity. Photovoltaics were discovered at Bell Labs in the 60s. The technology has not really changed since. Solar panels deliver only 10% of their rated capacity. These can never be economic for bulk power in industrial countries. This graphic compares the footprint of a nuclear and a power station with a wind farm or solar plant of the same total capacity, real capacity. This one picture captures everything that is wrong with these renewables in densely populated countries. The OECD estimates that the grid connections for all these windmills and solar farms will cost 20 times the grid for the equivalent nuclear system. Everything you touch is enormously expensive. They can all fail together. And so all of these can be out in the same bad weather conditions, and so you need 100% backup of gas-fired power stations. This carries monster penalties for the environment, this huge footprint. The extinction of species, our quality of life, our energy costs, our economy, our industrial base, and requires dismissal of all of our opinions. Such autocracy is only necessary in wartime. The funding has to be wildly excessive to draw investment for systems, since smarter politicians in the future may slash the subsidies. Here is a great windmill such as might appear in the middle of Bournemouth Bay. And here are the 200-mile-an-hour hurricanes generated by these windmills at full tilt. And here is a Boeing 747 landing and blowing red smoke to illustrate the giant vortex that it's created bouncing off the runway. Aeroplanes coming in too close to those vortices can crash. Think of birds and insects and yachts and anything caught anywhere near these hurricanes, and you've got a serious problem. A single chart is sufficient to kill the Navitus project. Lawrence Crapper, Commodore of the Christchurch Yacht Club, has assembled this chart of marine activities. The Navitus site is crossed by 13,000 ferries, tankers, cargo vessels, sailboats, motor yachts, super yachts, and fishing boats every year. Navitus, this purple spot in the middle, is the crossing point for all of these things. Navitus says everybody has just got to steer around it. But in fact, you're looking at all sorts of traffic. You're looking at tanker traffic going to Fawley. You're looking at cruise liners coming from several directions going in to Southampton. 1996, the Canberra, on her final voyage, lost power here and drifted for several miles before being able to set anchor near St. Catherine's Point. 2,400 people on board. It could have been quite different. And now these sort of ships are going to have to be diverted well away from this big hazard, which pushes them closer to the main routes of the English Channel. Lawrence Crapper has written a book on this, and it tells you how awful the positioning is. The worst in the UK. With regard to wildlife, birds and insects, it is a similar story, and the same chart can be used except you put these various creatures in. This is a connect the dots story of in Hengistbury Head Museum, a very nice museum, and it shows the pathway of swifts from South Africa and red admirals from Egypt and so on. And so the hazard, the DEC and DEFRA, our energy departments, don't care about birds or marine life, but a major loss of human life due to Navitus is probable in the lifetime of the wind farm. Navitus should not be allowed to go ahead. The RSPB, the Royal Society for Protection of Birds, and Dorset Wildlife Trust have fallen to the forces of Bumbledon and now support windmills ahead of bird life. They've lost the plot. The Navitus grid connection will be rated for 950 megawatts, even though that's only hit about 5% of the time. The connection worms its way across behind Bournemouth, worms its way round farms and properties and scheduled areas and zigzags for 35 kilometres to get to three-legged cross. And this illustrates, the difficulty of laying grid in densely covered England. Let's talk about something else. We've covered all the key issues on the wind farm story. talk about fracking for two reasons. One is an amazing new resource, and the second is how it got funded. The various levels of the water level, all sorts of things in between. In other places you'd find oil and gas up here, and down deep, 10,000 feet and deeper, are the shale layers which have got oil and gas trapped in them. Well, the experts said that it was not possible to get down to those depths, and they sought oil and gas around the rest of the world. Several poor farm boys in the US decided to leave grubbing for potatoes and do something to make them filthy rich. They seized on the neglected shale story and step by step leveraged small successes into bigger and bigger funding. Using new methods invented by the oil industry, drilling and fracking, blowing up shale, pumping hot water, have become a huge reality in the US. The ponds, lakes, inland seas, offshore oceans of cash in banks, hedge funds, and pension funds are run by people who know equally little about technology and were easily pumped. All of those farm boys became stinking rich. The big companies are now coming in. A more predictable event was the success of LED lighting. A 50-watt spotlight of 10 years ago now runs at 5 watts. And so your lighting bill is potentially reduced by 90%. It's a key part of the World Energy Plan that our total energy consumption for lighting, heating and travel must be reduced by about 25%. We're getting a win on lighting from technology. But just this week, the bumblers have cut support for insulating homes in the UK. So, big renewables, you are the weakest link and must go now, and your prize for your efforts is a wooden spoon. Prize for your efforts is a wooden spoon. Prize for your efforts is a wooden spoon. Thank you very much. It's a story of invention, discovery, obstacles, dead ends, daring escapes, and facing the implacable forces of Bumbledon.